Come be with you tonight. I will tell you, life comes full circle, and I have been aided by so many wise women throughout my life, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to bring it back to you. And I will tell you, I speak all the time. I never get nervous, and I am so nervous tonight because I just feel like I'm God's emissary, and I just want to share with you what God's done in my life and the blessings, and that's so very important that it does make me a nervous wreck. So my goal tonight is to share some priorities in my life and the choices I made and the way I stayed in the Word and how God has rewarded and blessed me beyond measure. My cup truly has been pressed down and overflowing. But I will tell you, it didn't start out that way. According to popular opinion, I didn't do anything right. I did everything backwards. I didn't make typical standard choices. So I'm going to use that as an introduction to myself and how I'm where I am today. So when I was 13, I was set up on a blind date with my husband, Mitch. He went to the Church of Christ in Santa Fe, where one of our preachers used to be. And a girlfriend of mine set us up on a blind date, and we went to Sonic when I was 13. I fell madly in love with him after I went in the house and laughed a little bit because he was fat. And he tells me now I was not fat then, but I remember going, oh. By the end of the evening, I was madly, madly in love with him. He was funny, he was cute, he was endearing. And our second date, we went to church and he sang, and I was over the moon for him from that moment on. And so, you know, it's difficult when you're 13 and fall head over and heels in love with who you know to be your soulmate. So we dated for 2 years and got married a month after I turned 16 and he was 18. Against popular opinion, I wasn't pregnant. I was just in love. And I had a 1-year-old sister, and they needed room in the house, so that my parents were happy to sign off on me. So my mother told me married women don't go to school. I quit school. My husband had already quit school. He was working as a mechanic. We got married, and when we married, even though we were so young, we discussed Christianity, we discussed baptism, we discussed our church, our kids, how we were going to live, how many we were going to have, what we were going to do. So we had our main priorities set out as we married, and we had determined that we would not leave our children in daycare. Well, that being the case, we both felt very strongly that our children would not go to daycare. So when we got married at 16, I didn't work. I was a stay-at-home wife because I did not want to get adjusted to an income that I would not be able to maintain whenever we had children. And so I was like the best wife. I cooked everything fried with gravy on it. Every day I vacuumed just for lack of anything else to do. And so Mitch and I did have those 2 years together to be alone and to enjoy each other, get to know each other better. And then we started having babies. And I fall into that teen pregnancy range because I was 18 when I had my first child, but I had been married 2 years by that time. And so the first child came along, and it was an absolute joy to stay home with him. 2 years later, the next son came. I loved it. We were done. We weren't going to have any more. It was perfect. 18 months later, I had another son. That's what happens when you're so poor that you don't go to the doctor and you don't take care of business. So we had 3 sons by the time I was 22. And our lives were almost perfect. We loved what we had built. We loved the choices we made. But I'm telling you, we were so poor. But I was with my children all day, every day. I was teaching them. I was training them. I was disciplining. I was doing everything the Bible tells us to do. And it was a joy. Well, my oldest son got to be 4.5 years old. And My husband was a deputy sheriff in Galveston County, and we were just immersed in drugs and gangs and violence, and the schools were, and we decided we can't raise our kids in this, immerse in a drug culture and expect them not to become a part of that. So we started praying. We prayed with absolute faith that we were going to go somewhere better for our family to raise our children. I started packing the house up. Everything was in boxes. We were packed up. We were going somewhere farther away from the coast, smaller community where we'd know everybody our children knew. We'd know all the people in the community. God brought us up to Centerville, Texas, where Mitch was hired with that sheriff's department, and they placed him as a resident deputy in Normandy, a town of 600 people. It almost doubled when we moved to town with all of our kids. Our family, our church, everybody we knew criticized us for making this move and moving away from family. You can't run from drugs. You can't hide in a bubble. You can't do this. And Mitch and I stood firm that we were going to give our kids every possible advantage we could that didn't cost money. We couldn't afford private school, so that wasn't an option. So we moved away from all of our families, all alone to this area. We knew nobody, but we knew it was a small community. Were there drugs there? Yes, but we knew everybody not to be around. We knew everybody in our child's class. We knew every teacher in the school. We went to church with them. We went to T-ball with them. We knew them. But we were so poor. We did without so many things. We had one old vehicle. We had enough money for gas for Mitch to get to and from work. There was no dates. There were no babysitters. There were no dinners out. I cooked 3 meals a day every day for probably 18 years. And we ate a lot of rice and beans and macaroni and cheese to make things last. I added mashed potatoes were a staple. Who knew they're bad for you, because that's what we lived on. So we then decided we need a piece of land. We need our children to raise some animals, be in 4-H, be involved in these positive things that are research proven to develop good skills, good responsibility for the children. We bought a ranch and a small piece of land, we call it a ranch, and raised our kids there. Now, we had a mobile home that was used, and it had a hole in the roof, but eventually there was a hole in the floor also, so rain would leak in and go straight through. We had what they now think black mold is so bad. I'm like, it's penicillin. It's penicillin, we're fine. Barely had air and heat most of the time, just to save money, to save pennies. We lived as poor as we could because we bought the boys a steer to show in 4-H, a hog to show in 4-H. We valued those type of activities to grow our children more than where we lived or what we drove. So for probably 8 years, till all the boys were in school, I did not work. I stayed home. I was there for them. I taught them. I beat them. I did whatever it took to raise good children. And when the last one started school, my husband's like, okay, you can do whatever you want to do now. We agreed to do this. You stayed home. You raised the kids. They're all in school. Do whatever you want. And I was like, whoa. Well, I was in a town of 600 people. There were no jobs to be had for an unskilled high school dropout. And God has a perfect plan, I will tell you, because I can look back and see it so often. Had a friend going to a junior college, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to school. I had been driving a school bus because I could bring my kids on my routes, and we'd all ride a route together. I'm like, I really like that. I'm going to go to college and be a teacher. Nobody ever told me I couldn't, and so I did. And I took remedial courses for a long time and ended up staying with it. So once my children all went to school, I went to college 2 days a week. I was still home 5 days a week. And it was a smooth, slow transition. So my children were almost in middle school before I ever truly went to work. And when I graduated from college, I got a job in College Station as a teacher, which was about an hour commute from Normandy. Everybody said you can't get into College Station. It's a prime school district. It's hard to get in. Don't say anything's hard for God, because it doesn't matter. God will give you whatever you need, wherever He wants you to go, if you seek His will in all that you do. And so I ended up there as a teacher, and I said, hey, Mitch, I'm across the street from A&M. I'm going to keep going. And he said, sure, go. Not knowing how difficult it was to get in, I got in. And it wasn't my grades. I was not that smart. I had a great, great work ethic. But I got in. And then I said, hey, I'm going to be a professor one day, so I'm going to keep going and get my doctorate. He said, go for it. And I did. And they let me in again. It was a mistake, I think, I'm pretty sure, because I wasn't related to who they thought I was related to, but it worked for me. And so by the time I was 40, I had a doctorate degree from Texas A&M, which was like a pipe dream that I never believed was ever even possible. And so this gave me more opportunity to train my children and to teach my children what's important in life and choosing priorities. So the sacrifices I made early on really did pay off at the end of my career, because at the end of my raising my children, because my children went to college and they followed in my pathway with a lot of choices and decisions that they made. But I say that to say, the first priority with raising children is to pray. Pray, pray. I was so young and so ignorant of everything. I was not even raised in a true Christian home. So when I married Mitch and I joined the church and I was baptized, I was still figuring out my own faith and understanding what being a Christian looks like. But I was seeking that diligently, because my children's soul was more important to me than anything in the world. That was my thing in life. That's who I was. That's what I was going to do, the most important thing in my life. And so as I prayed and prayed, and I said, God, I don't know what to do. I'll beat them, I'll hug them, but let me know which to do when. Because I don't know. Sometimes I want to throttle them and they need a hug, and sometimes you just want to love on them and they need a good whipping. And so I do believe that seeking God, staying in the Word, staying in prayer with my husband, with my children, God provided my pathway. We had certain principles we lived by, and we made choices early on, and we were just stubborn enough to stick to that no matter what kind of adversity we faced. But it's not that choices we made were right or wrong. It's that God blessed those choices because we sought His will. And so I will tell you, as you raise children, just pray. There's not always a right or wrong, but God will take that and use it for good if you honor Him in your lives with your children. I remember the boys weren't too old, and we prayed together a lot as a family. And he prayed fervently, God, if I'm not going to raise these children to be Christians, take them from me now. Just take them from me. And I was like, wait a minute. And it scared me to death, but as I've grown in my Christian walk, I realize how the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. James 5:16, my husband had that faith. He had that desire to raise those children beyond what we wanted. They were truly God's, and giving them back to God and ensuring he followed God's will in raising those children. It's a huge, huge responsibility. But I think because we sought God, because we prayed, He guided us. He showed us the Word. We stayed in the Word. It wasn't divine intervention, but we sought to pray for our children. We also began early on praying for their spouses. And I know that you probably can't imagine that now, especially all of you ladies that are pregnant. Pray for their spouses, because they need to be chaste, they need to be Christians, they need to be kept from abuse. You need to love them. I used to think that my daughter-in-laws had to get my approval, but that's not right. I have to get my daughter-in-law's approval to hold this family together. So I prayed that I would love them. And I told my boys all along, once you marry, they're my child too. They are mine. They are ours. We are a family. But you have to pray through that. You have to be ready to love a child like your own because they love your child. And not be critical and not do anything to make that marriage more stressed or more difficult. God will give you that. And I have seen that, and I think, oh, thank you, God. You gave me 3 fabulous daughter-in-laws. I love them all to death. It's so easy. I prayed for years for that. This is a culmination of God's gift to me, that I love my daughter-in-laws and that they love me in turn. So pray for your children. Pray for their spouses. Pray for them when they're teenagers, because at that point in time, that's all you've got sometimes, or those boundaries, that respect that you've instilled in them when they're little. So teach. And you know, the Bible's pretty straightforward and simple about what we have to do as parents. And I'm going to briefly go over Deuteronomy 6 and 7. And it's talking about teaching your children the Word of God. And you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you should talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. That is a huge commandment. Not to get distracted, so that you capture every thought for Christ, that you use every opportunity to teach those children, to teach them the Word, to teach them the love of God. Deuteronomy 11:18 through 20 restates this, and we've learned when it's restated, it's important, it matters. You shall, that's a commandment. You shall therefore impress these words of mine on your heart and on your soul, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead, and you shall teach them to your sons, talking of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. And when you think about impress them on your forehead, on your hand, you think of tattoos, you think of staining something in the grass, you think of something you can't remove. And it tells you how you get there with your children. All day, every day, nonstop, as you get up, as you go to bed, not at mealtime and bedtime, but all day long, so that it's imprinted on their heads, particularly when their frontal lobes are still forming. When they're developmentally learning and growing, you stain this in their developmental makeup. They're never going to wake up one day and question what they should believe or why. Our oldest son was baptized very young, and we really did deter him. And we finally had the preacher talk to him, and he met with him one-on-one, and he came back and he said, "Why are y'all shocked? You've taught him this since he was born, and now he wants to do what you've told him to do." He said, "I'd be scared not to baptize him with the understanding he has." And I think he was 6. But he loved God. He knew God sent Jesus to die for his sins, and he was sinful. He understood it. Did he understand everything? No. Did he grow from there? Absolutely. And those beliefs and those systems that we imprinted on his brain have held fast. He's 35 this year, and him and his wife and their children serve God. And that's joy. That is joy to me and my husband. So along with these commandments, we also get a promise. Deuteronomy 12:28. Be careful to listen to all these words which I command you, in order that it may be well with you and your sons after you forever. For you will be doing what is right in the sight of the Lord your God. So that comes with a promise. You want to be filled with joy? See your sons and your daughters become Christians and raise their children as Christian. There's no purer joy than that. And I know that God rejoices in the same way. That's why we have a roadmap to follow for raising our children. One more promise, Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Teach all day, every day. Will they stray? Will they make bad choices? Will they do stuff you don't approve of? Sure. Will they love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and spirit? Absolutely. Because that is all they know. Because I imprinted it on them when they were so small, when they were so impressionable, when they were developed into the people they were going to be by the time they're 4 or 5. You lose your children at 4 or 5 for the most part because they go off to school. The Nazis used to take children from their parents because they knew the value of young minds and molding them or brainwashing them. It can be good or bad. And then you hand them over. I remember handing my 5-year-olds over to a teacher for 8 hours a day. I was devastated. I didn't trust anybody. Nobody was as good as I was with my children. And that's hard. And the rest of your life, you're letting go of your children. You're letting them go. That's why those first 4 to 5 years are so, so valuable. Number 3, discipline. I'll tell you what, my middle son taught me about discipline. I didn't leave the house without a belt, and I would pull it out in a heartbeat. I didn't care where we were because he was going to mind, he was going to behave, and he would try me. He was stubborn. The other 2 were somewhat pleasers. The middle one probably acted just like me, according to my mother. He was stubborn and hard-headed and willful. He also had the softest heart, and to this day will cry faster than any one of my boys. But I was diligent to spank him, to discipline him, to reprimand him, to teach him when it was necessary, to the point that I would be crying, to the point that I would say, Mitch, it's your turn, I'm going to kill him. When people say spankings don't work, I said, you didn't do it long enough or hard enough, because they work. My sister would spank her kids, but not very hard, and they'd laugh, and they'd come right back and do it again. If I spanked my kids, they didn't do it again. And I didn't wait on Dad, because I was with them all day, every day. They were going to respect whoever they were with, any adult authority. But there was also that equal balance of love, of time together, those relationships, that yearning to please me that was instilled in them also. So you have your times when you discipline and times when you love. Proverbs 23:12-14, again, another commandment about discipline. Apply your heart to discipline and your ears to words of knowledge. Do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you beat him with the rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with the rod and deliver his soul from hell. So this is a commandment with a promise. We're not just teaching them, don't do this. We're teaching them to obey. We're teaching them problem solving, to make good choices because there are consequences. God disciplines us. Those he loves, he reproves. He grows us. He trains us up in the discipline of the Lord. It's part of our growth process. Sometimes it's natural consequences of actions. Discipline is difficult. It's probably the most difficult part of being a parent. And again, knowing when to discipline, knowing how much. That needs to be planned out and consistent with your spouse before you get to the point of disciplining. But if you have a 1-year-old and you slap their hand and tell them hot, they're not going to touch something hot. If you don't, when they're 12, you're still going to be slapping their hand and saying, don't take that. My son, I had to spank a whole lot, my middle son. By the time he was about 3rd grade, I don't think he needed any more spankings. And you know what? I didn't tell them every night to do their homework. I didn't check their homework. They knew what they were responsible for. They came home and did their work. And they did not lie about it. They did what they were supposed to do. So when they went to college, I never checked their grades. I never checked their assignments. I never registered for them. They went to school and did what they were supposed to because they were trained up to do it from little bitty. So it's your responsibility to discipline your children. Number 4, time. When we look at Deuteronomy and we look at what it takes to rear a child, you've really got a good 4 or 5 years. Some kids start school in pre-K now, and we have full-day pre-K, so we're taking them away even younger and younger. And they're exposed to so many things in the world, and I will tell you this transgender, this accept everything, they're immersed in that. And colleges are the worst with their liberal ways, and we are trained to accept everything and trained that everything's okay. Even the grandkids, my granddaughter told me, I think it's cool when boys have earrings, and I went, what? They're immersed in this. This is what they know. That's why it's so important that you spend the time with them when you can to train them, to teach them, to show them right from wrong, to show them God's Word. All of this, when you lie down, when you get up, when you go in, when you go out, is talking about teaching them God's Word. So that's got to be stained on them. So they're questioning some of these things that are taken for granted and accepted in the world that they're going to face. They have to be prepped to go into battle the rest of their life. And school, work, community is a battleground for Christians. It's a continual spiritual battle, and they have to be prepped. And so that time is so very valuable. I gave my children 5 years. They didn't start pre-K. 5 years that my husband and I lived so dirt poor. My kids were on free lunch. We had a house with a hole in the roof. We lived in an old, ratty mobile home. We had one old broken down vehicle. We barely had gas money for church. People would donate money to us so we could have gas to get to church and back. But you know what? I had a priority, and it was to save my children's soul. God gave those children to me, and they were going to be raised as Christians, whatever that took. So those were my priorities. God gave it back to me tenfold, not just in material possessions, not just in my education, not just in the family unit we have, but in the joy in my heart, knowing that I have Christian sons that seek God's will. You can't imagine the joy that fills you with, or to see people living with guilt and regret. My mother-in-law is an alcoholic and has turned her back on the church and everything she knows because she has one child out of 5 that's a Christian. One's already dead. They all have renounced God and become atheists. And so she has, and it's sad, it's heartbreaking. And so I just never wanted to live with that kind of guilt or regret. So I did everything it took to meet those priorities. Was it the right ones? I don't know. God blessed it because we stayed in His will and we stayed in the Word. One other thing you need to teach your children is work ethic, whatever that means. A lot of people ask me, when I got my last child through college, they said, how'd you get them all to college? I have 4 sisters. None of their kids went to college. I'm like, dadgum those smart kids. I'll pay for their college until I'm dead because I had no savings for college. We had no plan for college. And I had 3 in college at the same time in different apartments in different towns. But you know what? I borrowed money. And we got them to college, and they had that work ethic. And that, to hear them tell it, their perception's totally different. They said, yeah, I went to college. My mom and dad worked us like Hebrew slaves out on the land, and I didn't want to sweat that hard. And you know, sometimes having a little bit of adversity builds a little bit of grit in these children, so they're willing to do something different. I'm not saying they have to go to college, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I'm saying whatever you do, you better be willing to work for it. When I didn't work, my husband worked 3 jobs. He worked at a parts house, he worked at an air conditioning place, and he worked at the sheriff's department. And my kids saw that. And they worked along beside him. They went to work many times with him. When they were in high school, they had jobs. When they were in college, they had jobs. People talk about the college experience. I said, no. It is a means to an end. They get in, they get out. And I just finished taking 19 hours a semester. They didn't get in for 12 hours. So I taught them that work ethic, and they valued that. And there was no way they were going to let their mom outdo me. So they tried to keep it up. And so now in their professional lives and their lives with their wives and with their children, they have a valuable work ethic that has proven that they are more successful in their work. They also came to value it. My son told me a week into college, Mom, I will break branches off the trees and have my kids pick them up before they come to college and be this lazy. They see that so clearly, so quickly. And so that work ethic is so important whatever you do, or whether you go into a skilled labor or college or not. You have to be willing to work. I will tell you the best gift you can give your children is a godly marriage. And that means your children can't be number one. Your husband must be number one. You have your children for 18 years. You have your husband for 50 or 60. If you want your children in godly Christian marriages, you better be modeling it for them. And that means taking care of your husband's needs first. I was on a plane with my granddaughters. We flew to Galveston because that's all I could afford to take them on a plane ride. And they came to me, because I'm with these 2 little girls, they said, if the air mask dropped, put it on you first and then the kids. Same thing with a marriage, with a family. You can't give your children what they need if you and your husband are not getting what you need from each other. And they have to know what love looks like, what a healthy marriage looks like, or they have twisted ideas and views. And that means women have to be submissive to their husbands so that their husbands will become leaders, so that the boys learn how to lead their homes, so that the women learn how to be submissive to their husbands at home. I have a daughter-in-law who's about to finish up her doctorate degree, and she has a real problem with submissive, and she was raised in the church. But she has a problem with that, and I've been able to show her, I make 4 times the money my husband does. I've been the boss at work for 20 years. None of that has anything to do with anything. I am a strong, independent, professional, educated woman. It doesn't make me less to go home and submit to his authority because he is my spiritual leader. My soul, I'm riding his coattails to heaven, y'all. And it is the only way I'm going to get there because he has always been the spiritual leader and set the boundaries for our family. When I married him, I trusted him with my soul. Why would I not trust him with every other decision he makes for me and for my children? I'm not saying I don't argue or persuade or cajole or bribe, but ultimately, what he says I do. And you know what? Frankly, it's a relief. That's a big burden to be in charge for everything. And so take care of your marriage. Keep it spicy. Stay in love with each other, because I will tell you what, my last son left when I was 40. It's the upside of having teenage pregnancies. I was 40. I got to sell my home, become a superintendent, move around, travel, make money. My husband and I have been having a blast since our kids left. They were a lot of work. Every fight we had was about kids and money. I tell them we don't fight anymore. I hope you're happy. So at the end of the day, the best advice I can tell you, and I was told this by a wise woman early on, don't live with regrets. Don't make apologies. Don't beat yourself up with mistakes. Oh my gosh, you can get mired down in everything you did wrong. God is doing it through you. You're His vessel. Stay in His Word. He will reward you with that joy of knowing your children, your grandchildren, your example you've set. None of my children put their kids in daycare, and yet all my daughter-in-laws are professional women. They lived next door to each other and kept each other's kids, and they all four worked shift work because they valued what they had grown up with and wanted that for their children. My only concern is they want the marriage Mitch and I have, and they're like, yeah, I want what you and Dad have, and they got married and thought they were going to have it. Then I had to tell them true stories about early on in our marriage and how things used to be before Mitch ever bought me a Mother's Day present. And they're like, Dad always buys you stuff. I'm like, not always. So they have to understand your hardships as well as where you are now. But that's the legacy you leave for your children, is that their souls are saved, you're going to see them in heaven, and you're going to enjoy and be filled with joy and not regret for the 40 years you're going to live alone without children. God has worked through my life so abundantly. I live to serve Him every day. Now I just live to retire so I can stay up late enough to come to church on Wednesday nights. And I still live with guilt over that. But it's always about giving back wherever you can. I never did dishes at any potluck dinner for 30 years, ladies. So if you don't ever feel bad. But since my kids left, I've always been one of the first ones at the dish sink because I can. I'm unfettered. We all come through different stages. So enjoy the stage you're in. Cherish your kids and those memories and the joy you have with them, because nothing's ever going to replace that. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I will take questions if you have any. I may not have answers.
I missed the very first part. You do just have the 3 boys. They're all boys.
Yes, ma'am. 3 boys, and I did not get to call Mitch and ask him to tell me their ages today. Like, he knows their birth dates and their ages and anniversaries. I don't even know how long we've been married. I have to call and ask him again, too. It doesn't seem real, but we've been married about 38 years, and our youngest is 31 or 2 or 30-something. And they all went to college. My middle son insisted on going to college, and I said, no. His senior year, no. I said, you're lazy and try to pass it off as stupid. And you're not stupid, you're lazy. There's a difference. You didn't even do your senior research paper because he did the math to figure out he could graduate without it. I said, I'm not paying for that. He was adamant he was going to college, and he did. But I wasn't above putting him in a ditch, a laborer job for a year or 2 until he was committed to that. Any other questions? I could tell stories all night. Thank you so much. It really does do me good to see so many young Christian women. And I will tell you, my daughter-in-laws are in other churches, but it's ladies like you who make a huge impact on their lives. And even though my kids aren't here, I'm grateful for you because it makes a difference and it is passed along. My kids benefit from people just like you being in the church and being a part, and their kids being a part and being supportive. Thank you.